In Clearview, there are a few places that are best avoided. The library and the basement of the Rhine-Court building, for instance. But there are also some people worth staying away from. One of those people is Mr. O'Neill, the principal at Clearview High School. It's not particularly difficult to stay away from Principal O'Neill because, as far as any of us students could tell, he only leaves his office once a year on graduation day. Every year he's wearing the same maroon argyle sweater vest, regardless of the temperature, standing at the end of the stage to shake each graduate's hand. And every graduate, without fail, shudders a bit as they descend the stairs with their diploma. But we do hear Principal O'Neill every school day, just after the first period bell rings every morning. A hush settles on the entire building as static emits from the school's loudspeaker. Soft at first, but growing louder until you couldn't talk over it if you wanted to. And then Principal O'Neill's voice cuts through the static in a dry, raspy whisper. "Good morning, students. It's a beautiful day. Be sure not to ruin it." It's the same message every morning, but everyone in the building listens raptly, as if hearing it for the first time. Like all the students at Clearview High, I hoped that the first and only time I'd be face to face with Principal O'Neill would be on graduation day. But thanks to my new girlfriend, Beth, that was not to be. Beth and I had only one class together, chemistry, and we were lucky enough to be paired up as lab partners. I guess lucky is the word. I loved spending time with her, and she always made me laugh. As a bonus, she was pretty good at chemistry. One day, though, our teacher, Mr. Benson, had a demonstration to share before we split off into our lab groups. He pulled out a small jar, which contained a small, grayish lump submerged in yellow liquid. "This is elemental potassium," he said, removing the lump and placing it onto a glass dish. He taught about alkaline metals as he cut the lump into a few pieces with a razor blade and returned all but one of those pieces into the liquid. With an enormous pair of tweezers, he dropped the piece into a dish of water. It fizzled, smoked, and then burst into flames. The flaming lump danced on the surface of the water until, with a pop, it exploded. The class cheered, and Mr. Benson moved on to explaining our lab assignment. Somewhere during the lab, Mr. Benson retreated to his office to take a phone call. Beth leaned over the table with a glimmer in her eye. "I've got an idea," she said, and just as quickly, she was at the front of the room, grabbing a tissue. But once she was sure nobody was looking, she reached into the jar and with her bare fingers removed a piece of the potassium. She made it back to the lab table with it, but it was clear that she hadn't planned her next step. So, with a shrug, she slipped it into the back pocket of the boy standing at the lab table behind her. "What are you doing?" I whispered. "I don't know. I guess they'll get a surprise when they do laundry." She winked at me, making an adorable face with her tongue stuck out to one side. I shrugged and we moved on with our lab. Mr. Benson returned to the room and everything was normal for about 5 minutes, until with a shout, the boy reached back, pulled the potassium, now smoking, out of his pocket and threw it into the air. It landed in a beaker, simmering on a hot plate, and promptly exploded. Not just the potassium, the whole beaker. Boiling water splattered everywhere as students retreated from the lab table. Once the mess was contained and the damage assessed, Mr. Benson turned to Beth, his face contorted in anger. He knew it was her, not just from her penchant for chaos, but also from her proximity to the victim. "What were you thinking?" he shouted. And then I did something even more foolish than what Beth did. "Mr. Benson," I said, "I did it." "Elliot?" he whispered, narrowing his eyes in suspicion. "It was me." He looked from me to Beth a few times. "All right then, Elliot. Off to Mr. O'Neill's office then." I froze, instantly regretting my heroism. "Go on," said Mr. Benson, gesturing to the door. It was too late. I had sealed my fate. Beth looked at me, her eyes wide in panic. But there was nothing either of us could do. Head hung low, I walked out the door and down the hall toward the principal's office. I stopped at the desk in front of his door, hoping somehow the secretary would save me. But though she grew very solemn when I told her why I was there, she allowed me through. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room looked normal. A desk, a lamp, a potted plant in the corner, and then the back of Mr. O'Neill's head, as his chair was facing away from where I stood. I stood there in silence, my knees shaking, unsure of what to say. I took in the details of the room like a man walking to his execution, every second lasting hours. Most notable was a map posted on the wall behind him. It was a map of Clearview, but this map featured red lines spanning like an octopus from the Rheincorp building to various other locations in town: the high school, the library, Dr. Robles' optometry office. I had little time to understand the significance of the map before the chair moved, and slowly Mr. O'Neill swiveled around to look at me. His face was stiff, his eyes emotionless through his thick glasses, and of course, the Argyle sweater. I tried to be respectful and look back at him, but I could only meet those eyes for a moment before needing to look away. Something about his gaze was intrusive. How long did he stare? I can't say. But I would have taken any amount of staring instead of what happened next. Slowly, painfully slowly, he opened his mouth, and through the thin crack of his lips, the sound of static escaped, growing louder for every millimeter his mouth opened. I stood there, frozen, as the static grew louder and louder. It was deafening. He sat there, still staring, his mouth unnaturally wide. And then, just as it did during the morning announcements, a voice broke through the static, but his lips didn't move. "It was a beautiful day, Elliot, but you've ruined it." And then, more staring. I thought maybe I was supposed to reply, as if anyone could hear me over the static. Mr. O'Neill rose from his seat. He didn't stand. His body stayed in the sitting position, but it hovered over his desk, still staring, still spewing static. Detention, detention, detention. He spoke the word on repeat, as if he were a car alarm, the same volume, the same cadence, and as he spoke, he hovered over his desk toward me. I tried to move, I really did, but all I could do was lean away from those glasses, that gaping mouth. But he never touched me. Instead, his finger pointed to a door to my left I hadn't seen earlier, clearly labeled Detention. I stood up, eager to be anywhere else, opened the door, and descended the stairs, the sound of static finally fading. The stairwell was normal enough, similar to the others at Clearview High, but once I reached the bottom, I knew I was somewhere very different. I emerged into a wide hallway with concrete floors and white cinder block walls, at least what was visible of them. Both walls were covered in steel pipes, wires, and most unsettlingly, those fleshy tendrils I remembered from a visit to Rheincorp. Overhead were long fluorescent lights, but half of them were out, and those that remained flickered weakly. Cautiously, I stepped down the hallway, keeping as far from the walls as possible. The only sounds were my footsteps and the soft hum of the lights overhead. The hallway looked like it went on forever, but a small sign on the ceiling directed me to the first door on my right. Detention room. I reached out and took hold of the knob. It was frosty cold. Opening the door, I was met with a gust of freezing air and total darkness. There's no way I'm going in there, I thought. But as if reading my mind, the sound of static started up again, growing louder from the direction of the stairs. With a shudder and a shiver, I dashed through the door and closed it behind me. Immediately, I concluded that whatever Mr. O'Neill would have done to me would have been better than this. Void, desolate, bitter. Was this detention? The only comfort was the hard concrete below my feet. Anything to assure me that I was still part of the world. There was nothing to do but walk. So with my arms stuffed in my shirt, I took a few steps forward, then a few more, shivering. My nervous breaths hurt my lungs. And then I felt my first something. My thigh bumped against a surface. Reaching out, I scoured it with my hands, trying to determine what I was feeling. It was a school desk? I stepped around it, but soon found myself bumping another. The floor was riddled with them, and in the dark I bumped into dozens, slowing my pace and causing bruises, which I couldn't see, on my legs. I wish the desks were all I bumped into. Somewhere along my frozen wandering, I tripped over something low to the ground. After recovering my balance, I stooped over and tried to discern what it was I had tripped over. My blood ran colder. It was a body, fully clothed, backpack and all, frozen solid to the concrete. So, not everyone makes it out of detention. Just as I thought, I too would die of hypothermia. Leaning against a desk in the darkness, my first glimmer of hope appeared, in the form of, well, a glimmer. Far in the distance, I found the first speck of light since I'd entered this awful place. It was tiny, like a single star enveloped in blackened sky, but it gave me something to seek. It gave me hope that there was an end. I walked on for what could have been an hour, until I realized something else. It was getting warmer. Soon, it was what I might have called comfortable. Even the darkness seemed to fade as I drew closer to the light, which was still quite far away. Still, I could hardly see, but there was just enough light to make out the desks obstructing my path. But now I could move more quickly, maybe even escape this place. The cold was one type of punishment, disheartening, disabling, but the heat, I wasn't ready for it. As I continued, the comfortable climate got warmer and warmer until it was no longer comfortable. Sweat dripped down my face as I continued toward the light, which was growing larger, though still indistinct. But I wasn't too dumb to notice the trend. It would keep getting hotter, but I wasn't sure I could handle much hotter. And as it got hotter, the space shrunk. Soon the walls and ceiling were all within reaching distance, but one touch of the wall was enough to warn me not to do it again. But as I continued, the walls contracted. Soon I was bent over, soon crawling, soon on my belly, pushing toward the light. This was worse than the cold, because I was forcing myself into it, and it was only getting hotter. Soon I reached what looked like the end. I was too big for the hole. Reaching out, I touched it, and it flexed, like a fleshy membrane, featuring a tiny pinprick of a hole. My body was burning up. I began to panic. With manic effort, I pushed into the tiny orifice. One arm first, then my head. I pulled myself through into a wet, fleshy mire, still scalding hot. Looking back, it was similar to how I felt inside Rhine on that awful day. I flailed my way deeper into the furnace of tissue until my arm reached something cool. I gripped and clawed the rest of my body to the source of the relief and found myself underwater. With every ounce of energy and oxygen I had left, I swam to the surface and found myself in a public pool. Gasping and panting, I found my way to the edge of the pool, happy to be alive. I collected myself and took stock of my surroundings. The lights were out, but I could tell where I was immediately. The pool within the Clearview recreational facility. My heart sank. It was after hours, and the Clearview recreational facility was home to something else after hours.